Communitech helps founders start, grow, and succeed. Our members raise 19% more capital, raise more rounds, hold more patents, and have an increased financial velocity. Communitech member companies scale faster than anywhere else in Canada. So if you're not a Communitech member yet, let's fix that. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining today's Ask Me Anything session on blockchain, crypto, and DeFi. My name is Christina Wood, Director of Programs here at Communitech, and I'm so pleased to be moderating today's session. If you would like to find any of our past Ask Me Anything recordings, they can be found on our website at communitech.ca. We're also recording this session, and we'll have it posted there as a resource for you to refer back to. We welcome questions throughout today's discussion. So our presenter really is hoping for this to be, lots of questions to him on what's important to you. So we'll definitely cover the basics on blockchain, crypto, and DeFi, but really want to get to the heart of your questions. So please make sure to put those in the Q&A section and upvote questions that you also want the answers to. And lastly, if you'd like to connect with our presenter after today's session, please feel free to reach out to your Communitech FSM and they will get you connected. We also have an upcoming Ask Me Anything session on Tuesday, November 16th on scaling your business into the US. So please make sure to stay tuned to our Your Week in Tech newsletter on registration details for that event. And with that, I'd love to invite Cédric Jeannot up to the virtual stage. Cédric is a Communitech growth coach, co-founder of the Financial Group, and also founder and CEO of A Privacy. And I'm so pleased to have him here today to talk to us about this topic. So come on up to the stage, Cédric.
Can you guys hear me well?
Hello.
Good afternoon. All right. Thank you all for joining. Maybe before we get into the kind of the details of crypto and hopefully you guys have plenty of questions on how to make money, but more importantly, what is blockchain, what is it useful, and what should you care about it? Maybe a little bit of background about myself. I'm originally from France. I like to say French by birth, Canadian by choice, and I've been a tech entrepreneur most of my life, which means I've never had a real job essentially. And most of my businesses have been in fintech or technology for finance, but I've built multiple businesses in the kind of blockchain crypto space, from a digital bank in Africa doing financial inclusion to trading hedge fund investment type firm company. So a whole range. Some businesses purely focused on money making, other businesses on money making, of course, but with blockchain as a tool to really do new things. And when I'm not doing this, I also spend some time at Communitech coaching companies on international expansion, on crypto, on blockchain, and on anything else that our companies need in terms of getting them from point A to point B, with point B being a better place than point A. So with that in mind, I guess maybe we'll start maybe with a small intro just to set the stage, and then we can go ahead and fire the questions.
Perfect. So, sorry, I was just going to say, so on that note, can you start off by talking a little bit about blockchain? What is it and why is it important?
Yeah, so let's maybe do a definition kind of moment. So blockchain essentially is a piece of technology. So it doesn't do anything else than it is a tool, a technological tool, which essentially provides decentralization. So in the case of Bitcoin, it's a money use case, sending money between two people, or Bitcoins between two people. But Bitcoin works because it's built on the blockchain. Technology, underpinning Bitcoin and a lot of other things, is what is really a game changer. And to me, blockchain will have an effect on the world as significant as the internet has had on the world, right? So if you remember 94, 95, who would have imagined back then that, in 2020, 2021, you click on your phone. Number one, you have a phone that's small. You click on it and a car comes pick you up. So blockchain will have, to me, a similar effect. And so Bitcoin is probably the most famous use case, which is a money use case. But there are many use cases where the ability to have decentralized trust, meaning not relying on the central party to approve something, is very, very useful. Think electronic voting, right? You want to make sure people have voted. It's the right, they don't vote twice, but you don't want to know for who. If you have a central entity counting the vote, that can be tampered with. Think about registering land transfer in emerging market. Right now, you go to the mayor's office, you register that you are the owner of this piece of land. But what if someone changes the paper? You're no longer the owner. So having a digital distributed ledger is actually very useful and significant in innovation in a lot of other sectors.
I think that's really helpful to draw those parallels. And so then moving to crypto, what is it and why is it important?
And so crypto is the overall kind of like put everything you want in bucket. But really, when you look at crypto, you should look at essentially digital money, digital stocks, or digital anything with some kind of value. So Bitcoin, as I said, is a very common example of payment, but you can have a token, so a digital currency representing the US dollars, which is backed by an actual US dollars on the back end. So essentially it is a US dollars, but represented on the blockchain as opposed to in a bank account. And once it's on the blockchain, then you can do a lot of things with it. It could be a token, so a cryptocurrency could be essentially your voting right in your condo building. And you own one condo and you have one token, and that's one vote to vote for decision in the building, which is called a governance token. It could be your air miles, which you're familiar with, the kind of airline or shopping center, which is built on the blockchain for XYZ advantages, and that represents your kind of ownership of it or your kind of miles. So it could be a lot of things, but most of the time when you hear about cryptocurrencies in the news, it's related to money, it's related to things going like 300% increase in a week, and it's related to like speculative investment. But outside of the financial component, there are a lot of use cases. Now, with that said, in the topic of finance, through the blockchain, the infrastructure, the technology infrastructure, it is now possible to create on certain chain smart contracts. Think about it as like a mini program. And those programs will do things that you tell them to do. And in the context of finance, this has given the rise to DeFi, decentralized finance, which is the industry where people are building decentralized application on the blockchain to reproduce, what a bank or financial company will do. Think lending, think trading, think derivative. So anything that you will find in the common financial system being built in a distributed way. And that, as an industry, went so big that now it has its own name, and it's its own kind of subsection of the whole crypto universe.
So, thank you for those definitions. And so I understand that some companies might be thinking about these things as far as investment, and some companies might be here today to learn about how to use them in their own business. And so can you talk a little bit about those differences?
Yeah, and that's a very good point. They are actually very different, same tools in the toolbox, but very different end goal. So let me maybe give you an example of, we started with a few partners, a digital bank in Africa a couple of years ago to do financial inclusion. And one of the use cases, if you really want to do financial inclusion and take people out of poverty, is to really reduce the cost of moving money, remittances. So you hear about people in the US or Canada sending money to Africa. But the most difficult piece is the intra-Africa use case. So if you try to move money from Malawi to Congo, that's very difficult. Because there's no financial infrastructure, there's no solid banking system to do that. And so you will use companies like Western Union, MoneyGram, or others to try to do that. Now, if you look at this kind of case, and your end goal is to say, okay, I want to go and I want to provide the cheapest possible way for you to do that, you can only optimize existing banking system so much. But if you were to build an equivalent payment system on the blockchain, you can essentially reduce your cost, the cost of moving the money. I'm not talking about the margin that people are on top, just the cost of doing the transaction by an order of magnitude of about 100 times. So let's say something costs you 100, now it costs you 1. That's the order of magnitude. And so blockchain as a tool, forget about, of course, if you look at it as a business, that's the right tool to do the job because it reduces your operational cost by 100 times. So that's a very good example of, it's not because it's cool, it just happens to be the better piece of technology to do that piece of work. And so that's a very good example of using blockchain to achieve a business objective, which in this case is moving money. In the case of the investment, most of it is investing into a cryptocurrency or a basket of cryptocurrency in the hope that tomorrow it will be worth more. Most similar to like the stock market. I'm buying a share of Apple today because in 2 years I hope it's going to be worth more, and then I sell it and that's how I make money. So the first use case is using the technology for a business benefit. And then the second use case is using crypto, being in the investment space, but using crypto as an asset class as opposed to stock, real estate, or any other asset class.
The audience today, if you're willing to put into chat where your interests lie, like which side are you here because you want to figure out how to use it as a tool for your business, or on the investment side, just again so that we can kind of gauge where people are at. So I'd love for people to put into the chat kind of what you're hoping to walk away from today's session with.
No, it's a good mix, business and investment side. So let me maybe address the business in the more general context. So I think the best way to look at blockchain, because fortunately it's becoming very, very popular. Unfortunately, it's also becoming very popular. So you hear all kinds of stuff, and most of it is nonsense. What you need to look at is what is the business you're trying to solve. So, and does that use case have a trust issue or something where you have like a broker is a very good example, right? You want to buy a house. You need to have a real estate agent most of the time that brokers the transaction, right? You have the buyer, the seller, but there's a person in the middle. Now, that person does a lot of things, but one of the, when you look at the transaction itself, you usually have a lawyers and it goes to a trust account, and essentially once everybody, you give me the house, you give me the key, okay, let's swap the two, right, with the money. Imagine if you wanted to do this on the blockchain, that's a very good example of the middleman is there for trust purposes to ensure everything goes well. We could code an application that says automatically when party A deposit asset house and when party B deposit money, if money equals, automatically swap. And so that's a good example where you don't need a real estate agent anymore. You don't need a lawyer or a trust account. The software, the piece of software will do it, and the software, the code is low. That's what's implemented is what's gonna, you cannot, get the software to do some other stuff. Once it's pushed into the blockchain and the rules are set, So that's a very good example of there was a broker before, someone is in the middle, and you don't need that middle person anymore. In the case of Bitcoin, in the money use case, the business case was peer-to-peer exchange of money. If I need to send money to someone else, you can't really do that unless you take cash. You can't really do that electronically. You have to ask your bank to send money to their bank for them to get the money. And so that was the use case that the business was solving.
Are you still there, Cédric? We've your video.
Yep.
You're back. Okay. Perfect. So it looks like we have a number of people who are interested in, it as a tool plus investment, and then we also have some folks that are looking to dig a little bit deeper. So maybe we can look at the chat first and just kind of address kind of some of these areas that people are interested in. So where would you like to start?
So let me maybe start with, I see NFT metaverse, so I'll keep this for a little bit after. We've got to warm up people. This is going to be fun. But in terms of, like I see a comment on security, for example. So security is actually a very interesting use case for blockchain. So because number one, blockchain is built on encryption methodology, which is, essential for security. But there are a lot of use cases in the case of trust where essentially that middleman, like imagine if in the case of real estate that I just described, if someone were to get the money and then the middle person is essentially running away with the money. That's another problem, right? So from a security standpoint, having the software essentially being able to just swap when the conditions are met, but not being able to take that money out is obviously a plus. But you can think about a lot of use cases around identity. When I talked about voting, electronic voting, where the security of such system is very important. If someone hacks into the voting system, that's a problem because it's going to sway the election. It has the potential to. And with the blockchain, because the system is distributed, because the way it's coded, the way it's called a blockchain because it's a succession of blocks, and the next block is based on the previous block, it has a lot of things that have essentially built-in security features, where if you do care about security, maybe as an infrastructure, it's better than just starting a server on Amazon. It's distributed, yes, it's different, but it will do a lot of things already built in that you don't have to build yourself. So when it comes to security or use cases that involve security, like payments, like financial services because it's regulated, like other use cases, the security aspect is really, really important. Now, on the security, there's also the privacy aspect. So people say, well, like it can be used for illicit on the case of Bitcoin. You have to understand that everything on the blockchain is public. So every single, for example, Bitcoin transaction that ever happened are recorded and anybody can go see them. So it is as transparent as it gets. What you don't know is you go where it went from point A to point B, address A to address B. You don't know who owns address B. So there's some anonymous factor because you don't know who's behind the address, but any single transaction is actually technically visible to all. And therefore, I think it's which are closed, which you don't know how it works because anybody can go verify. If I tell you I have 6 Bitcoin, you can go verify that I have 6 Bitcoin. I see a question on regulatory, so I'm going to touch on that a little bit, and then we're going to go to like investment and other stuff. So regulatory is a huge problem. And take it from someone who runs banks. So I have no problem with the regulator. I have my fair share of regulation. We are regulated in multiple markets. We deal with lots of regulation. So I just want to make it clear that I'm not against regulators, and we do work with them quite a lot. The problem with regulation and the current state in Canada specifically is black is one thing, white is one thing, and everybody can live with it. Gray is the problem. And right now in Canada, we're not in one camp or the other. We're kind of in between, and the in between can create a lot of issue because it's up for interpretation. It's up for, I don't even know if I should do that because is it legal or not legal? It's legal in the US. Canada usually follows the US, but we don't know. It's interpretation for maybe a bank will say, well, I'm not giving you a bank account because I don't know if it's legal or not. And in the case where you can even get some regulation, sometimes it even plays against you because you made the effort, you are regulated, but then it still doesn't mean the other partners are going to deal with you because there's this gray area. And what's interesting is in Canada, more than in other countries, because of the conservative culture, it really is a huge issue because in some countries you'll say, look, they haven't said it's explicitly illegal. We're going to do it until someone tells us not to do it. But right now, if nobody told you it's not illegal, then it's not illegal. And in Canada, even if it's not illegal, people will just not want to deal with it, which means that because in some businesses there are a lot of money to be made, and those are the businesses of the future. A lot of Canadians are running crypto businesses outside of Canada, and not because they don't want to be here, because it was just not possible from a business risk standpoint to be here, because they don't want to end up in jail for nothing or wrongly accused of, they build a business and then suddenly something changes. But there's been a lot of discussion in Canada on regulating certain aspects, but it's always like, it's been years and nothing has changed. And now because the market has become so big, it does create a huge, huge roadblock for innovation. And I do think from a Canada standpoint, we really need to get that sorted. One way, it's legal, it's illegal, you need a license, you don't need a license, but we need to have a very clear framework because at some point there will be nobody doing crypto in Canada. And this is a bit like, as I said, the internet or AI. This is a strategic field for Canada in the future. So if we miss that train is not coming back. So it has far-reaching implication, but yeah, from a regulatory standpoint, and I don't know the reason, by the way, I don't know if it's they don't care, they haven't had time to get to it, they don't have the technical expertise to really understand it, they don't get the right advisor, but clearly the current situation is a problem that needs to be changed.
Like the current workaround is to go do it somewhere else. So how do we address?
There was a known Waterloo-based entrepreneur who's after EdTech company, I'm not going to give any names, but people know him very well. Is launching a DeFi fund that is now moving to Cayman. And this guy is as Canadian as it gets. Is a very kind of huge, successful entrepreneur in Canada. But for that DeFi fund, he has no other options. And I can tell you, I've known many people who moved to Zurich, Switzerland, or Singapore because those jurisdictions have very clear framework on what you can and cannot do. And so once again, nobody is discussing that the game is not good. People just want to know what the rules of the game are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
But hopefully we do get some, essentially it's so big now that you really can't avoid it. People realize, look, it's here to stay. And it's just whether or not do we want to play in that sandbox or not, or do we want to let all the other country attract that talent, build the businesses of tomorrow, and we left with nothing.
Very interesting. I didn't realize we were so far behind on that aspect.
Yeah, I think regulation is one, and also I do think from a macro level, I don't think the authorities in Canada necessarily understand how transformational it's going to be. And I equate that to the conversation we had a few years ago with AI, where people didn't really think it was a big deal, and then realized, okay, now we really need to be in AI, and we really need to have IP policies and data sovereignty policies and all kinds of other stuff, because it's going to pay dividend in the next 20 years. I think crypto, the industry is so big, you have to understand blockchain, you have to understand what it is not. But every major, look, China's rolled out, digital currency. It's already 300 million people. The European Central Bank is doing it. Some of the investors in crypto are like Goldman Sachs, Morgan Stanley, JP Morgan, BlackRock. Those are some of the biggest names in the world. So, the trend has left the station. We have a short windows to kind of jump back in that trend, but we don't want to miss it.
Yeah, for sure. Let's switch gears a little bit, I was going to say, and touch on the investment side. We have a few people interested in that aspect.
Yeah, so on the investment side, I think you really have to look at speculative versus non-speculative, but as a bucket. And we have an investment company who does this full time. That's all people do. You can look at it as a better way to do finance. Once again, if you are using DeFi, so decentralized finance, and using a protocol or software to buy something, to sell something, or to trade, the cost of providing the service is going to be a lot smaller than if you're using a company. So let me give you an example. So if you wanted to buy crypto, or let's say switch crypto, you have one crypto and you want another one. So let's say you have something called USDC, which is a digital dollar, and you want to buy Ethereum. You will usually need to go to an exchange for that. So there are numbers of exchange, including Coinbase, which is a big one because it's now public. And you'll create an account there, and then you'll put your USDC, your digital dollars, and then you can convert it to Ethereum for a small fee. Now, that's a centralized entity providing that service. So you have to trust that they will do right by you. And once you deposit the money, they don't run away. Now, in the case of in DeFi, so in the decentralized, the equivalent will be what's called a DEX, a decentralized exchange. And a decentralized exchange, you essentially put your money into the contract, and then the other piece comes. So, by the time you release your money, the other one has come. So there's never a risk that you send it and it's not coming back. So that's a little bit better because you don't have to trust that. But also because it's a software that is optimizing for pricing, and this person wants to buy, this person wants to sell, I put the two together, and the fees are going to be a lot lower. So if you look at it from a business standpoint, it's like, wow, I'm getting the exact same service, but it's a lot cheaper. And therefore I'm getting much more for my money. So that's better. Now, the interesting piece is because those are essentially fully autonomous program, the Coinbase example is, Coinbase, I don't know, thousands of employees, and let's look at Uniswap, which will be an equivalent on Ethereum chain for changing cryptocurrency. Uniswap at some point used to run something like $200 million of revenue, meaning the fees that they get on the volume, $200 million per month, which is obviously a very significant business. But it's actually quite crazy when you think that at that stage of the company, it was like 35 employees. So there's obviously an investment to be made into Uniswap as a company through their token in this case, because you're like, wow, those guys are printing cash. If part of the cash goes back into the token, there's money to be made. But there's also money to be made as an entrepreneur building those kind of protocol, because the scale that you can get on a very small amount of resources is just, you can't compete with that. Another example I like to give is a company called DYDX that does leverage trading or perpetual kind of type instrument. And I think the trading volume for the year is like something like $400 million, and it's a 25 people company. The scale is very crazy. So from an investment standpoint, I think it's interesting because you can do several things. You can bet on the fact that you bet on blockchain and DeFi as an industry. And so your bet is, if I'm buying telecom and I think telecom is going to grow as a sector, then of course your stuff grow. Or if I'm buying the S&P and I think the S&P is going to grow, so same. So that's a quote unquote more conservative, but you're betting on the long-term future of blockchain or the industry of DeFi. You can buy specific tokens or protocols. So it's almost like buying a stock. I want Apple and I want Google and I want Tesla. So you can pick specific companies or protocols, and then you can also say, what, this is very speculative. It can go up, it can go down, but I want to buy it now because the industry is getting like an index fund, which is a basket of multiple things. And so that's less risky. You may make less money, but it's also much better. And as you look at those essentially buckets, and you compare that to other alternatives. So let's say in the first case was essentially building a traditional kind of tech business versus a distributed business. Or if I'm buying, a Uniswap token versus buying a Tesla stock. Or I'm buying a normal index on the traditional kind of financial sense or a crypto index. If you look at every single bucket, it doesn't matter how you slice it, the returns are better, period. So if you're going to buy an index, you may as well get a crypto index because same amount of effort, same amount of risk, adjustable, assuming you compare apple to apple, but more returns. And when I say more returns, I mean, it's not like, a good company on the S&P may make, the store outside of tech, last year was a bit crazy, they may, increase like 30% a year, which is obviously crazy. Or, some of the tech essentially doubled in price. Yeah, but in crypto, what the top performing in the traditional sense does 3 times. In crypto, the top performing does 11 times, 20 times, 30 times. So once again, apple to apple, it's a much better investment. But as I said, what people have to understand is within crypto, you can get quote unquote conservative approaches, which have very limited risk, but a lot more upside than the traditional finance. And that's why essentially it's an 18-month-old industry, DeFi, decentralized finance, that went from $300 million in volume to, $250 billion amount in the system in a year and a half, which is crazy, but that's because there's better opportunities.
And do we run into the same regulatory challenges on the investment side, or has that been sorted out a little bit better?
So that has not been sorted out. So technically, I mean, because it's decentralized, it's it's impossible for a government to block you. I mean, China even tried to block their own citizens, and so they couldn't. So, what government really want to block, essentially they'll put pressure on the bank so you can't cash it out. But the government has no real tools. Even if you make it illegal, people can still do it. So it's very hard to block it. Now, so people will do it and will continue to do it. But once again, it's a gray area. It's not legal, but it hasn't been explicitly said whether it should be regulated or not. And the bigger problem comes when it comes to taxes, because in Canada, you have a tax regime that is quite heavy. So then it's like, is it treated as income or is it treated as like a stock? Is it treated like long-term capital gain? So there are a lot of things that have to be discussed and have not been discussed yet on when it comes to taxation. Is it even reportable income or is it tax-free? How does it work? If you make a lot of money up, of course you may pay taxes, but if it crashes, do you get a tax deduction? It should work both ways, right? So tax, I think, is the bigger problem, but on an individual level. But for companies, of course, most people won't touch it at an institutional level because, while nothing prevents them from doing it, and the government hasn't said it's illegal, nobody explicitly said that they should do it, or it's okay to do it, and therefore, people are just standing by. But there are definitely a lot of individuals who are also considering now moving because of taxes, and this is not a Canadian problem, it's more of a tax regime. So taxes are what they are in Canada, they're what they are in the US, but if you start having those, making 30 times your money and you move to Dubai, that makes a huge difference because in Dubai it's tax is zero. So it's like anything else. But the taxes, I think, is the bigger problem. That hasn't been addressed and will have to be addressed because at some point, as more and more money, it's going to be a bigger part of the economy.
Thank you for that update on that.
Yeah, and I see one more comment on taxes. And so, yes, so the comment is, the regulator doesn't know, the tax authority doesn't know, and the accounting, and because we operate an investment business, I can tell you, even from an accounting standpoint, it's extremely complicated because technically everything is public on the blockchain. So you could argue that one of the distributed applications in the future will be you don't need auditors. You can't cheat the system. It's all in the blockchain. Everything is visible for everybody, right? So you don't need someone to verify that it was actually done this way, because the blockchain will be the proof that it was done this way. But because there's no clear guideline on how it should be accounted for from an accounting standpoint that leads to taxes, but just, how do you even look at that? It is a huge problem for the auditor, because the auditors, it's not that they don't want to do the job, but what framework do I use? How do I account it properly, right? And there was a good example recently with Tesla, which is obviously a listed company, who has a bunch of Bitcoin in its balance sheet. And in the US, the rules that they gave them was over a quarter, they have to use the lowest point of Bitcoin. And so Tesla in the last quarter was reporting a $50 million loss, even though they are like, hundreds of millions above, because Bitcoin dipped and then went back up a lot. And so accounting wise, they have to use the lowest metrics, even though Bitcoin is like twice the value now. So it shows up as you're losing 50 million while they have like $400 million extra cash. So that's some of those kind of nonsense where it makes no sense, but it's because we're trying to fit this new thing into old rules, which were not made for that. And my view is you don't treat real estate with the same rules that you treat stock option. So why is it any different for crypto? Crypto needs its own set of rules that works for that specific use case.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so we've heard about some of the limitations or some of the problems we're running into around regulations and other things. So for those on the call who are entrepreneurs, how do they use this to grow their business? What advice would you have for them on how to leverage?
Raise a bunch of VC money, invest in crypto, quadruple your money. Now your runway is bigger. No, don't do that. I think people need to look at it as, is there a use case or a part of my business that could be done better with the blockchain? So let me touch on the NFT, because I see there's quite a few comments on NFT. So the non-fungible token. So I'm not going to get into an explosion on NFT, but let's just think about it. If you're an artist, whether you're a painter, whether you're a musician, actually, I'm going to take music. That's a very good example. So back then, you were a musician, you put your stuff, save as MP3, very easy to copy, right? And people copied because there was no real accessible way to get music in a cost-effective way. Then the market matured, and now you have Spotify, right? So you can download the app, and people will be, okay, I'm happy to pay $10, $20 a month, because there's a service that provides value. And so let's look at a company like Spotify, which is a private company, closed, centralized. They have agreement with labels, they have agreement with artists, they have the users, and essentially they have some accounting in the back end that says this music was played X amount of time. We need to give $1 per time and then that's how they get paid. Now imagine if you were to put this on the blockchain. In the case of music, you could say this music is a token, and I'm going to put some parameters in it that says every time this token is played or given to someone or listened to, automatically take 1 cent and give it to the author. And this will be so that your royalty system is fully automated now. You don't have to do any accounting. As the content gets used, then you get some revenue, and the revenue, not more, not less, exactly what you are owed to. In the case of NFT, it became very popular with images. And so it's a bit funny for a lot of people who are not familiar with art, because they're saying, why am I going to pay for the ownership seal of an image when I can just go and copy and paste the image and I can use it? Sure, you can do that, but it's like real art. In the future, in the metaverse, there will be digital museum. So imagine if you own a piece of art, now you rent it to a museum and you get paid for your piece of art. And people will pay into that digital museum in VR headset and go in to look at that piece. Or you can have a hybrid combination. There's a digital copy of an actual physical piece of art. And when you buy the physical piece of art, you get the ownership ticket. So NFT is misunderstood because people don't realize that there will be an entire virtual world where those things have sense. Right now, it seems like a bit like a gimmick, and there's obviously been a lot of scam. But if you understand intellectual property rights and how do you get paid artists, and building something to say every time this painting or this image is sold, the creator will get 10% cut. Very convenient, right? Change the business model, change the dynamic for the content creator. You could not do this in the public, like in a non-crypto way or non-blockchain way, because it will cost a lot of money in legal very hard to enforce. How are you going to track secondary market? On the blockchain, everything is trackable. So if you think NFT is a fad, you wait. If you think digital gaming in crypto play to earn type business is a fad, you wait. Like companies like Sandbox or DeFi Land, Axie, I mean, those are already multi-billion-dollar business, and they're like 2 years old. And Axie is a very interesting one, actually. So it's a digital game you play, and then you can buy a piece of land and plant your stuff and whatever in a digital game. But you can make money because then you can resell the carrots that you grew and whatever. There are many examples of hundreds of thousands of people playing this in the Philippines, and lots of people getting out of poverty through the money of they play to in the game, and they just need the smartphone, and so it also changes people's life on a very kind of real aspect. But of course, it may be weird for someone to say, "Wow, Visa paid $150,000 for some pixelated company or pixelated image." But once again, imagine yourself in a digital museum, a digital world where owning digital land is going to be worth something because people will buy your land to build stuff on it. Very, very different universe, pretty early stages, but only going to get bigger and better.
Yeah, that sounds like it's growing really, really rapidly.
Correct, but it does take a little bit of a leap of faith or a little bit of, okay, let me dig into it. You have to understand it you have to understand from the art people. If you were to talk to someone who does traditional kind of Quai d'Orsay in France museum type or National Gallery in Ottawa, like to the average person, okay, it's a painting. But to someone who's in art, they can tell you where it has value and stuff. And I think in a digital world, it's the exact same stuff, but there's a big disconnect between those arts people and the kind of everyday person. So people fail to relate to them and see why it's a big deal. But anybody who's on that camp can tell you it's a big deal. And I've talked about music, we talked about images, but you can think about like, you can buy stock photos or stock videos if you want to edit videos. So that could be fully decentralized. Every time I click on the image, I want to use it for 6 seconds, automatically charges $2, which is the fee. And then, so all like label, like how you produce an artist. Do you have to go to Universal Studio, or can everybody contribute $5 and you have X amount of money, and now the smart contract releases the money to a production company that will produce the artist because it has been crowdfunded, quote unquote. Many examples of how the blockchain is a far better way to do it, and in some case is an enabler because you could not do it in the traditional sense without the blockchain.
Very, very interesting. Very interesting stuff. We do have one comment in the chat that I'll go back to. Looking at hiring for these types of skills. So, you've mentioned that.
Okay, so after regulation, that's the biggest problem. There is a huge shortage of talent. I mean, it's such a big shortage that in Africa, we are running a bank, like we're a fintech bank. And we are debating whether or not we should start our own school to train Africans on blockchain technology, coders, project manager. Like, this is not our market. This is not our expertise. We don't know anything about education. But that's how bad it is. There is anybody who can code on the blockchain these days, and you'll find a job like yesterday. And those are not like small little pop. I'll give you an example which is extreme, but I will say among developers, it number one pays a lot more. But I'll give you an extreme example of a known company who's trying to hire someone who has 5 years experience in a specific chain and ecosystem. Quite rare, but not, it's not like there's 5 people in the world. There are a lot of people, but a bit niche. And they put an ad, and I thought it was like, okay, wait a minute. So the base salary was $325,000 US, and it came when you join on sign up with $1 million in stock, not option that you like give you $1 million. And this is today's practice to hire one person. So it is completely crazy, and we have a huge delta because blockchain is evolving so fast that the time to train people, number one, the time for people to realize that it's important, the time it takes for smaller boutique firm to put training material to train the next guys, to have them train and be productive, is a long time. It takes years for a university to even put a curriculum. There's only three universities, I think, in the world who offer some kind of blockchain coding stuff in a formal program. So it is a very, very big problem. And anybody who's in school who's mildly interested in this, it's about 10 years ago when I started cybersecurity. If you were trained in cybersecurity, you could work anywhere in the world. To this day, it's still true because there's a lack of good security people, trained people. Blockchain is the exact same stuff. And therefore, yeah, this is only going to get worse because there's a huge talent gap and therefore a war for talent. But that's also a huge opportunity for a place like Waterloo, with University of Waterloo, a lot of tech entrepreneurs, to have access to talent or groom talent before, get them into that space and give us a long strategic advantage to build the companies of tomorrow because we have the chance to do that. But yes, talent is a huge problem anywhere in the world.
And so is there, so essentially there isn't, a spot where you can go and...
Not really. If anybody is competent, they already have a job and they already have 20 offers on top of that job. I think it's really building the pipeline that we need to do. And also just telling the next generation. And a lot of people know because now there's so much money to be made in crypto that people are aware of it, while people maybe before may not know. But it's just like, okay, this is a suitable, number one, field. You're going to get employment, but also this is something for the long run that makes sense because that's the infrastructure of tomorrow. It's like saying, I want to get into cloud 10 years ago. Probably couldn't go wrong. Or I want to get in AI now. Unless you're really bad, there's really nothing wrong you can do to be in AI and you'll be out of a job because there's just so many use cases in AI that are coming up. And blockchain is the same, except that the field is moving so fast that, yes, there's a shortage. And even companies that have like developer for hire, so there are companies who raise a lot of money, hire a bunch of developers, train them, and then kind of second them to other projects. I know one in New York, very big, for example. They have about 1,000 developers, so they're a very big shop. And they have at any given point 160 to 200 job open that they can't fill. That's the scale of it. And this is people who pay a lot of money, who are very well known, who work with some of the biggest clients in the world. And even they can't get it. So yeah, I think for our ecosystem of tech-enabled and tech-inclined people, huge opportunity on the talent side to train the next guys, make sure they're Canadian or they train here if they're foreigners and come to study in Canada, but also as a feeder to local companies in Canada to kind of build the next wave of companies.
Yeah, there's a comment in the chat about does UW offer any crypto right now? Or
not to my knowledge. I was talking to some of the people in the mathematics department about a year ago and nothing came out of it. I think you need a champion. I've been out of university for a long time. I've never worked for university. So I do, my comments from the outside is I think you do need someone a non-professor or non-person administration to be the champion and really push it. And I want to say, it's not like there's politics, but number one, like the average person, most of those people are not aware of the opportunity. They don't fully understand it. And even if you wanted to do, let's say, a minor or something, there's a whole process that has to go through, which takes months, if not years, which by the time it's kind of out. So, in our case, we looked at, models like Khan Academy, like online self-serve or hybrid, or like coder training. So like you have a competition and you remove a person every week type of thing. We try to look at like hands-on, really practical training and pairing this with, because in crypto, we know a lot of people in crypto, okay, get those guys like internship co-op type thing so they can work as part of a team as a faster and better way to kind of get people up to speed. But I think it's still years ago until we see a proper blockchain or crypto degrees. There are classes in Singapore, in Zurich, in Israel, some of the, Harvard, the Wharton, they have also business classes to try to, from a business standpoint, but pure tech, very, very hard to find it.
We have about 5 minutes left of time this afternoon. So I'm going to encourage the group, if you have any last questions, to please put them in the Q&A section so we can make sure that we answer them. So I'll give folks a minute if you have any last burning questions to throw them in there. While we're waiting, any final thoughts from you, Cédric, on?
Yeah, I think one, obviously, because we do a lot of things in Africa and soon in Latin, we have maybe a different view. But I think also the people in the audience, think about there are a lot of stuff that we take for granted in Canada or in Western market that the emerging market don't have. So there's also a lot of opportunities to build businesses here that serve those emerging markets. It was recently announced like a few weeks ago that the largest kind of crypto country now in the world is Nigeria. And that may seem weird knowing that crypto is illegal in Nigeria. Plain illegal. But if you ever try to send money in and out of Nigeria or do any financial transaction, and you get a bit of a sense of the financial infrastructure and how the bank works, it makes perfect sense why people will use blockchain. And it makes perfect sense while they were using in Bitcoin, which, to be fair, there are other ways to move money that are better. Bitcoin maybe not the most efficient way, but even that is better than what they have. And so, yeah, turns out it's the largest user, right? And in LATAM, same stuff. In the Caribbean, same stuff. In Central Asia, Tajikistan, Turkmenistan, all those countries which don't really have sophisticated financial infrastructure, same. So there are a lot of use cases for emerging market where, there's also an opportunity for Canadian firms to go and say, oh, yeah, this may not be as relevant in Canada, but has huge application in Venezuela or in Colombia or in Ecuador. So that's something that you may want to think about because we come across, because once again, we're a bank, project and use case, every day, tokenizing solar bonds, land rights, pre-crowdfunding for farmers so they can get cash to build the crops and then you get the returns after. You name it, you slice it. If there is an intermediary or a broker, as it is often the case, blockchain can do it better.
Sounds like that's the opportunity to look for, is that replacement of that middleman, and then blockchain might be the answer.
For sure.
Great. Well, I didn't see any last questions coming into the Q&A, so
I see maybe one final comment. I see a comments on Ethereum and other things. So we've talked about blockchain as a technology, but the technology can be applied to something. So think about like spreadsheet. You can use Excel, which is a spreadsheet software, but you can also use Google Sheet. Same, but different. And so in the blockchain world, we have different chains. So when we talk about Bitcoin, it works on an implementation of the blockchain for Bitcoin. When you talk about Ethereum, which is the smart contract one that I mentioned, it's built on Ethereum, which use the Ethereum currency as the base, but and then you have other stuff, Solana as an example. And based on what you're trying to do, there may be some blockchain that are better than others. So, for example, if you want to do like a lot of like a payment, small transaction, high volume, you may want to get a blockchain that is optimized for that, as opposed to Bitcoin, which is only kind of person to person, and is not really optimized to do millions of transactions per second. It's not optimized to be the next Visa, but something like Solana has a lot more potential. If you want really advanced, complex, smart contract features, you may want to look for something like Ethereum, which has the most sophisticated chain so far, but also the most amount of developers who can help you build these things. So keep in mind that there are multiple chains for multiple use cases, and then you can also look and pick what makes most sense. It really is just like infrastructure. We used to run a server in the office to build a website. Now we use Amazon or Azure or Google or whatever. So think about it as an infrastructure. What else can I build on top of it? And which of the service provider, aka the chain, should I use to build my use case?
I also see a comment in here to just once again touch on the security business. Yep, I'm curious about the security business is the question. So I think we touched on security back.
The security, the high level is because the infrastructure is so powerful. It's pretty well built. It has a lot of security features built in, but there's also application on top that you can do in the context of security. So like if you want to do encryption or file storage. And so let's take file storage, and let's say you want to secure documents online. If you have them on a cloud and someone hacks your cloud, that's gone. If you have them on a distributed ledger and you have millions of pieces everywhere across multiple computers, it's going to be very, very hard to get that file. So think about it in terms of security credential the same way. If you have a central system, it can be compromised. If it's distributed, exponentially more complicated. So there are a lot of security use cases, or whether it's encryption, privacy, identity, where just the nature of doing it on the blockchain is 10 times better than the traditional sense. And once again, you inherit this, so you can just build a value add. So things like Dropbox, they are now Dropbox equivalent, decentralized blockchain, and it is 10 times better. A little bit more costly because it's nascent, but if I really want to secure my fund, have a secure environment, 10 times better. So yes, security as an industry is only going to get impacted more and more by blockchain in a positive way.
A couple of other questions that have come in. So there's a question here about private blockchains for multinational or internal uses.
It's a very good question. We haven't even talked about that. Yeah, we can go for another hour. So all the chains I've talked to you about so far are public blockchain, meaning infrastructure. You come, anybody can use it. No restriction. You don't have to show your name. You can just use it. Use a wallet, it works. But the concept of distributed ledger technology in the blockchain can also be used because it provides better security, etc., by private entity. China is a very good example. China launched the e-currency, which is essentially the currency like in Canadian dollars. The Central Bank of Canada issued it, so their central bank in China, and they use blockchain for its technology, for its benefit, but it is a closed blockchain that only the government have access and nobody else can kind of use it. They will give you the money, you can use the money, but essentially they control all the pieces of the stuff, and it's not an open blockchain, it's a closed. So they're using just the benefit of blockchain, the infrastructure, for a use case which is totally centralized, quote unquote. And that's why you hear CBDC, so central bank kind of digital currency. But there are a lot of other stuff, like if we're dealing with a government in Africa that is looking at replacing the ID system and issuing proper sophisticated IDs, where they may store the information on the blockchain. It will be a closed blockchain. Obviously, only the government has access to that, and the appropriate government authority. It's not for everybody to go see whose photo, whose name, who lives where. Of course, there's a privacy concern here. But they're using it as a better database than a central database because it has better security, better access control, and all kinds of other stuff. So that's a very good question, and they are indeed open blockchain and private blockchain, which are essentially just one corporation or government controlling everything, but using it as a technology, as a better way to implement the product.
Great, thank you for that answer. We do have one last question. If I know we're right at time, but maybe we can squeeze it in. RJ is wondering about any feedback on VeChain.
On what?
It's VeChain, VeChain.
Not really. No, I mean, I don't have anything one way or the other. Too early to say, I will say. Once again, so the different chains, so there are lots of different chains. I stopped, counting. The question is, okay, are you building a piece of infrastructure for something or just because it's cool and it's trendy? So in the case of Solana, it was driven by, high frequency payment because they were a trading company behind. So there was a clear use case. In the case of Ethereum, it was the first one, the drive was to say, we want to do programs on top. We want it to be programmable. You can't do this with blockchain. So there are many chains for many things, but it is very hard to, number one, build it correctly, make it scale, and also attract an audience. Ethereum gas price, so the fee that you pay when you're in a transaction is nuts. But yet, it's the place where there's the most number of users, so people still use it. It takes a lot of people out of the equation because now if every time you do a transaction, you have to pay $50 when before it used to be $2, it's not the same economics, but that's where millions of users are. So I think people often build or want to build a chain because it's cool, or but unless you have a real use case that you're trying to solve that cannot be done, you can get the appropriate funding and talent, but you have a very clear strategy on how you're going to bring people to use your chain. It's like a great piece of research that sits on the shelf. And so that is that's why you see a lot of chains. And I think in this particular example, too early to say. And then, as time goes on, then you see like winners or you see people getting critical audiences. But yeah, there are lots of them. I think there's 5 or 6 that are worth being on right now that have already shown kind of scales, user traction, whatever. But of course, there will be some tomorrow that the leaders of tomorrow may not even be born today.
Thank you for answering that question. I know we're right at 3 o'clock, so thank you to everyone for joining today. If you are a Communitech member, please feel free to reach out to your Communitech FSM, and they'd be happy to connect you with Cédric for follow-on conversation. So thank you so much for joining today, and thank you, Cédric, for your time and your expertise in this area. Very exciting stuff to come, and I hope we can do some work to change some regulations, get some education going so we can find talent in these areas and that Canada doesn't kind of get left out of this exciting opportunity. So so thank you, everybody. Thank you, Cédric, and take care, and we'll see you next time.